Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Joshua. Today we're ready to start looking at Joshua chapter 13. Now as we move into chapter 13, we're ready for a new section of the book. The first 12 chapters dealt with the conquest of the Promised Land, the movement of Israel in and to take the land that God had promised them. And now in chapter 13, really chapters 13 through 19, it details the division of the land. Now that Israel is essentially in control of the promised land, it must be divided among the various tribes. Each of the tribes will receive their portion, their inheritance. And so we have a detail in the next number of chapters, several chapters, of how the land was divided, what area each tribe was to receive. The larger tribes would receive more, the smaller tribes would receive less. They basically tried to divide the land among the tribes in as fair and equitable process as possible. So that begins now as we move into chapter 13. However, before that division begins, the first several verses of chapter 13 let us know that though Israel now controls most of the promised land, there are still areas that are not yet under their control. There are a few areas still not under Israelite control yet. And that is described in these first few verses of chapter 13. Let's start reading that. Now, when Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." So the mission is essentially accomplished, but there are still some pockets of resistance, a few areas that are yet to be taken. And Joshua understands that, and he understands that it will be a number of years before some of these areas are subdued and taken over under Israelite control. Notice verse 2 says, "Now this is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and the Geshurites, from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north, all of it counted as Canaanite, though held by the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron." Now, those 5 cities mentioned are all the traditional Philistine strongholds or cities. This is an area along the coastline, along the Mediterranean coast, and it is the Philistine territory, and it's not yet under Israelite control. It will be a long time before it will be. We know that in the early history of Israel, in the time of the Judges, and then also in the time of the first king Saul up until the time of David, the Philistines continue to be an ongoing nuisance and problem for Israel in that area along the coast. It's David who would finally decisively deal with the Philistine problem and defeat them and bring them under the domination of Israel. But even here in Joshua, they mention it specifically as an area that the Israelites have not yet come into possession of. There are other areas as well. It says the land of Lebanon from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath. Now that's in the far north of Israel, around Mount Hermon, the northern parts, and the area of Phoenicia, or what is today southern Lebanon. That also is not yet under Israelite control. So we simply see the point made that though Israel controls most of the land, and they do, there are still some pockets of resistance, primarily along the coastline where the Philistines are, and in the north around Mount Hermon. That's the far north of Israel, and in Lebanon. In addition to that, there are a few pockets within Israel itself, places like Jerusalem and a few other cities that have not yet come under Israelite control. So the Lord says to Joshua, "I know everything's not under control. You've basically taken the land, but there's still work to be done. And this will continue even after Joshua's life of the taking of this land. But God promises that it will all come under Israelite control." Notice verse 6 says, "As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Mishrefoth-Maim, and that is all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. So be sure you allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have instructed you, and divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and half tribe of Manasseh." Now, it says 9 and a half tribes because those are the tribes that inherit in the promised land proper. Remember, 2.5 tribes have already inherited their possession on the east side of the river, what is in today is called Jordan. That's why 9.5 are mentioned, because these are the ones still to inherit their possession. So God says, go ahead and divide up the land, even the areas that are not yet conquered. Go ahead and divide it up among the tribes, for one day it will all be yours. Okay, now for the rest of chapter 13 and then through chapter 19, as I said, we're going to look at the division of the land, how Joshua and the elders of Israel divided the land among the various tribes. We'll begin looking at that in tomorrow's session. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Joshua.